take a seat. I think the children and young people are going to go out. So if you would just like to bow your heads, we will pray for them. Lord, as Kelly and the team leave with the children, just hold your hand over them that they might hear your word and have a fabulous time enjoying life in your name. Amen. We're just going to give them a chance to leave. So we are now going to enter a time of prayer. I'm just going to ask that people just bow their heads and spend a moment just welcoming in the new year. There will be points during these prayers where I will say, Lord, in your mercy. It would be great if you responded with, hear our prayer. Heavenly Father, you sent your Son to guide your people, just as you sent a star to guide the wise men to worship him. We pray that you will always be present to guide our church as we begin this new year and as we take our steps along our journey of faith. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Lord, as we face the start of 2026, we pray for your world. As we stepped out this morning, the news across the world is uneasy at best. Let the star of your justice always shine in the hearts of those who are in authority.
get right. I was really encouraged in my previous church when we saw particularly young men coming into the church. There were a handful over a period of about 2.5 years, young men who came into the church with no faith background whatsoever. You might have heard of this thing called the Quiet Revolution. It's going on nationally, where people are seeing little trends of people coming into church seemingly off their own backs without really any invitation, just wanting to know more about God. And people have been looking at the stats and they're totting up the numbers, and they're starting to see what they call a trend of this thing called the Quiet Revolution. It's happening in the background, it's happening piecemeal. It's not happening in a huge way, but it's significant, it's worth noting. And we saw it in the church I was at previously, young men particularly, but not just young men, coming into church off the streets. There are two guys I can think of in particular. One guy is a sort of semi-professional rugby player, and one day he just picked up a Bible and started reading it and started to connect with God. Remember I said at the start of the sermon, connect with God. He started to connect with God, and he turned up to church one day and he became a member of the church, and I was able to baptize him several months later. It was an absolute privilege. Another guy, as a young electrician in his 20s, and he was into philosophy. He started reading about famous philosophers, learning about what they think in life, and then he tried different avenues of thoughts. He tried atheism. He realized after a number of years it wasn't really working for him, so then he looked at Christianity, and suddenly, or gradually, things started to fall into place. So he turned up at church one day and he started to connect with God. And down the line, he was baptized as well. And he brought so much joy. Both young men brought so much joy to the church because having encountered with God, they just seemed so happy all the time. They still had struggles and things that they wrestled with, but they were so joyful having encountered God. So they went on this journey where they didn't just have knowledge about Jesus, they pursued it by being part of a church and being in relationship with other people in the church, and then ultimately being in relationship with God. What does that look like? To connect with God, to be in relationship with Him. And I want to bring us to this point, which is this: whatever your position on your journey with God is, as you connect with God, sooner or later, you're going to come to a point where God will tap you on the shoulder and He'll say, that thing's not quite right in your life. Or the way you live your life right now, it could be better. Or I have a much better way for you to live your life so that you're free from this thing that you're struggling with. And God might put His finger on a habit in your life that's unhealthy. Or He might put a finger on something in your life from the past that you've been carrying with you, that you try and bury, but it's there. It's something that happened to you in the past that was really difficult. And God says, you know what? In your journey with me, as you connect with me, I can deal with those things that you struggle with in your life. It could be habits. It could be something to do with the past. It could be broken relationships. In the Anglican tradition, we talk about thought, word, and deed, the things that we do wrong, the things that we say that are wrong, the things that we think that are wrong. And the Bible calls these things collectively, and it puts them into one big ball, if you like, and says it all comes under this banner of sin. Now, sin is an unpopular word to talk about, even in churches, let alone in society as a whole. But if we want to go forwards with God in 2026, if we want to continue to connect with God, if we want to be in relationship with God, sooner or later, it might not be at the start of the journey, it might not be for a while along the journey, sooner or later, God will come along and He'll gently tap us on the shoulder and say, what about this? What about this thing that's not quite right in your life? And the Bible calls it sin. Joe read from Romans just now, and Romans it's a difficult book to work with. It's not very popular. Preachers don't tend to preach on it. If they do, they're being very brave or very foolish. I'm not sure which. It's a long letter that Paul wrote to the church in Rome, and it's difficult because it pulls no punches when it talks about sin. It addresses the issues that humanity struggles with. We wrestle with stuff in our lives, but very courageously, Paul writes in the letter that rather than brushing things aside, we can be free from the things that we struggle with, free from sin. I was thinking this past week, how do I illustrate the problem of sin in our lives? And for some reason, my mind rested on this what do we call it? A wind ball? Maybe it's not a wind ball. You ever seen one of these where you throw it and it makes a whistling sound? Sometimes we play with it in our family on the beach or in the park. It's my favorite thing to play with in the park, but not so much for my family. I don't think you like playing it much, Jude. I don't think my daughter does either, but I like throwing it. And I was thinking, what is sin? How do I illustrate sin? Sin is a bit like this. It's like you've got a ball or something and it's welded to your hand. It's super glued to your hand. It's so super glued to your hand, it's like an extension of your body. You can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of sin. And you maybe have a few options in front of you. One is to, with sin, to deny it's there as part of your life, to hide it away. But sooner or later, you discover when you look at your hand, it's still welded to your hand. You can't shake it off. You can't apply anything to it. You can't crowbar it off. So that's one option, is you deny that it's a problem. You deny that it's there. What about this? The other option with sin is to try and get rid of it yourself. So when we talk about the Christian faith or religion in general, we think that if we do good works, if we make ourselves a nice person, if we help other people, if we try and make our lives better in our own efforts, we can lose this sin in our lives. It will dissolve the glue somehow, and it will fall from our hands. But the challenge with works is that we could be working with our left hand like this, working hard to make our lives better, but we're still welded to this thing. We can't shake it off. So that's one option. And maybe we could say that's to do with sort of when we feel guilt or shame, we try and work off the sin somehow. But a third option is this, is that we give up. We think it's too hard. I can't shake off the past. I can't undo this habit. I can't live a better life. I can't be a nicer person. So I'm just going to give up and spend my life walking around with this blessed thing in my hands. I can't get it off. I may as well just give up. That's essentially the problem that Romans outlines. It says we've got this thing called sin. It's not just what we do, it's actually a part of us, that we are sinful people. We are sinful individuals and sinful humanity. There is nothing whatever we can do. And you could stop reading the first part of Romans, and it would be very depressing indeed. But then the rest of the book goes on to talk about the solution. What frees us from this thing that's welded to our hands? And Joe read about it in chapter 5. It's Jesus. Jesus is the only one that can free us from this thing that's welded to our hand. And I particularly like this verse 8 from Romans chapter 5. God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's God's love which means that we can be freed from this. What does God's love look like? If someone asks you, what does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to know God? Or what is God's love? We can say it's Jesus. Jesus comes into our life. He came into the world, comes into our life, and he frees us from this thing called sin that we're wedded to. And he does it like this. He simply comes, and it's like, to use the analogy, he has hands that can melt glue. So he comes in and he takes. I need another person who can. Do you want to be Jesus? Okay. It's like he comes into our life and he takes the sin, and the glue just melts away. And Jesus takes the sin, and Jesus walks back to his chair. Thank you very much for that. And you might think, well, that's a very simple operation. That's a very simple thing that Jesus has done there. Great, I'll sign up to that. But there's a little bit more going on, because in order for Jesus to melt the glue and to get rid of our sin, it has to cost God something. Why does it cost God anything? Why can't God just take the sin and that's fine? Why do we have this thing where Jesus dies on a cross and is resurrected in order to deal with our sin? That's often sort of one of the catchphrases of Christianity. Jesus died on a cross and was resurrected to take away our sins so we can be free from sin. We rattle it off as Christians. It sounds very simple, very straightforward, and very relatively painless. But it's much, much bigger than that. It costs God everything. It costs God everything to take that sin away. Because as he takes it away, he takes it onto himself. It's like the sin becomes welded to his own hands. And it's not his sin, because he's completely sinless. It's our sin, my sin, your sin, the world's sin. It comes into his hands. It's welded into his hands in such a way that it kills him. And he dies. But God, by his power, in being God, raises Jesus from the dead. And the sin is dissolved from his hands, and it falls to the floor, and it is done away with. There are no easy analogies for explaining God's work in freeing us from sin on the cross. But he did. He took it from us. And it was sacrificial. There's sacrifice in it. We watched the Narnia story yesterday. I don't know if you've watched the film or read the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's the most memorable story from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, the imaginary world where 4 children in the Second World War tumble through a wardrobe into a fantasy world, and they meet a Jesus-like figure called Aslan the lion. But one of the children is tempted away from good towards evil by the witch, and he's imprisoned by the witch, and she lets him go, but it has to cost something. The witch asks for payment, and so because Aslan is the one who's able to negotiate the freeing of this boy Edmund, Aslan the lion has to give himself up. He has to take Edmund's place. So he dies in Edmund's place because Edmund's a traitor to the cause of good. And Aslan is murdered on a stone table by the witch. But he's raised to life. He comes back to life a short while later, showing us what happened in the Christian story of Jesus being raised to life. And Aslan goes on, he fights the battle, defeats the witch, and so on. It's a great story if you haven't read it. That's one sacrifice story. One of my favorites is Saving Private Ryan, where the soldiers give up their lives in order to rescue just one soldier called Ryan. Maybe you have your own sacrifice stories, maybe in a book or a film, and it inspires you. We get inspired by sacrifice stories when someone gives up their life for someone else, and we understand that it has to happen in order to free someone. There's no way about it. When someone sacrifices themselves, they're not doing it because there's another option. They're doing it because it's the only way. And we get behind them in the story. We get behind Aslan, or we get behind the soldiers in Saving Private Ryan, or whatever story you like. And we feel sad for them, but we know it's a courageous, good thing to do. And that's what Jesus did for us. Now, we might be sat here and we call ourselves a Christian, or or maybe we're new to the faith, we're wondering what it's all about. To begin with, we lay a foundation of knowing that we are freed from sin by Jesus. Because once we know that, we can enter more into the grace that God has for us in our lives. And it's a difficult path to walk. We could walk a path whereby we know of God's love, but we've never really encountered that sense of sacrifice that he's given for us. So we've never really taken our rubbish, our sin, to the cross and allowed Jesus to take it from us. It's an essential part of the Christian journey. And I want to invite us into that journey, to give over the things that we know to be wrong in our lives. And I'm talking about the things between us and God, not the things that people have done that are bad to us. We can look at that another week. But the things that we've done wrong, that we know in God's eyes aren't right. So how do we do that, whether we are a Christian or not? How do we live in that life that God has for us? Well, it's very simply this thing called confession. I'm not talking about going into having a formal confession with a priest, although you might find that helpful, but a confession, confessing our sin to God, sitting down maybe with a bit of paper, writing down the things we know to be wrong. Doesn't have to be a long list, just some of the things that are in our minds. Sitting down, talking to God and telling him the things that we wrestle with. It's okay, just between us and God, you and God. I wrestle with this, I've struggled with this stuff from the past keeps hassling me, this habit, this thing that I know to be wrong. And we say to God, look, I'm sorry about this stuff. I want to be free from it. And as soon as we do that, in faith, as Christians, we know that God forgives us. Because we're coming to Jesus. We're coming to the cross. And we know that Jesus, through the cross, takes all that stuff, takes all of that rubbish from us. And we're free. We're free from that sin. All of it. And we can do this whether we call ourselves Christians or not quite. It's the start of the journey for some of us. Doing that could be the start of the journey of becoming a Christian. For others of us who've been a Christian for a long time, it's actually, I do need to do some business with God. I feel like I know this stuff about the cross and God's forgiveness, but actually there's stuff that God is bringing up in my life again. It's stuff from the past or stuff that I've fallen into. We can all do that. And it's that way of connecting with God. It's one step along that path of connecting with God in 2026. It may be that God then says to us, as well as saying, you're forgiven, you're free, how about making amends? How about living in this way instead? How about apologizing to that person? How about learning to live in this new way, in this particular area of life? We find that we are free, we're lighter, we can journey with God. And confession, you might have a one-off time of confession like that, but really it's an ongoing practice, something we can do every day if we want, or every week, or once in a while. Sit down with God, or as we're walking to work or down the street, and just think, yeah, I do need to be free of that thing. I do need to turn that over to God. We don't have to wrestle alone. Here at St. Mag's, our vision is to build a community with Jesus at the center. We might ask, well, why? Why put Jesus at the center? Why don't we just put God at the center? Why don't we just put church at the center? Or why don't we put, being together at the center? Why Jesus at the center? We put Jesus at the center for many reasons, but on this topic of getting free from sin, Jesus is at the center because only Jesus can deal with our sin. Only Jesus can hear our confession and do something about it. Only Jesus can make us right with God through the cross. Only Jesus can remind us of the way to go, and not to go backwards, but to go in the way that he wants us to go. Only Jesus can reassure us of God's love. And I could go on. There's so many reasons to put Jesus at the center. Why wouldn't we? He deals with the fundamental issues in our lives that we can never break free from ourselves. We don't have to live in denial. We don't have to live through working hard. We don't have to give up and despair. We can know God's freedom in our lives today and all days. So can I encourage you, and I'm speaking to myself as well, if we want to connect with God in 2026, and at the start of this series, thinking about hope for a troubled world, why not? Why not connect with this topic of getting right with God, being reconciled to God at the start of this year? And as I say, it might just be having that little time of confession between you and God. But for others of us, before confession, that time of confession, we want to be praying. We want to be coming to God and saying, God, I want to give my life to you for the first time. I don't know if you're here and you've never thought about being a Christian. Maybe just thought you'd try out church. But one way you can do it is to pray and say, God, I just invite you into my life. I want to start that journey with you. And when I'm ready, and when, God, you think I'm ready, I want to make that confession of the stuff in my life, or begin to make that confession of the stuff in my life that I know not to be right, how you would have it. And see where God takes you on that journey. See what freedom you might find as you do that in your life. That's one thing to do, is pray a prayer of giving your life to God for the first time. Pray a prayer of confession for those of us who've been on the journey for a while or just starting out on the journey. Thirdly, something else we can do is do Alpha. We've heard it already this morning, but we're running an Alpha course on the 20th, from the 20th of January on a Tuesday evening. Hopefully you can make Tuesday evenings. If not, we'll be running Alpha later in the year. But Alpha is a way to engage with the basics of the Christian faith. And what I've been explaining, or trying to explain this morning to us now, will be looked at in a far better way on the Alpha course. The basics of the Christian faith, what it means to know forgiveness, what does the cross mean, why put Jesus at the center? All these things will be unpacked on the Alpha course on Tuesday evening. So would you consider doing the course? Would you consider bringing someone along who might need it more than you, but you come along with them and you sit with them and you meet them when they turn up at church, or you bring them from their house and journey with them? What a wonderful thing that would be, to see a friend or family member doesn't yet know God. Go on that journey that I've described this morning of connecting with God, and then at some point coming to a point of asking for God's forgiveness and God's love and God's freedom in their lives. It's a wonderful thing. And we'll have that opportunity on the Alpha course at some point as well. And then the final thing, as I finish, is baptism. That's a wonderful way to express God's forgiveness. We baptize some people just before Christmas, and baptism, going into the water, symbolizes that dying to that sin that I talked about, to having that ball taken away from you, that death in the water to sin, and then that rising again to new life, free from sin. And of course, we continue to sin. We're human, but knowing that God has dealt with our sin is an amazing thing that we express and experience through baptism. Maybe you want to be baptized. Maybe you were inspired by those being baptized some weeks ago. I'd love to chat with you about that. I've already had one person email about baptism We love to baptize people here. We love to do it regularly. So if that's something for you, then and that's part of your journey of knowing God's forgiveness in your life, then I'd love to chat with you. Would you like to stand? We're going to pray, and then the band are going to lead us in a song or two of response. I want to encourage us to connect with God, to not lose focus just because we're moving into a time of worship, but to bring whatever you want to God this morning in song. And we have a couple of prayer ministry team who will hang around at the front there with lanyards on, those lanyards, and they'll be willing to pray with you. If you want to just chat with them during the song. If you find it too noisy during the song to be heard or to listen to people, then myself and maybe the prayer ministry team and others will hang around at the end. If you prefer to be prayed for at the end of the service, that's absolutely fine as well. You can grab a coffee, come back, or grab my arm or grab one of the prayer ministry team's arm, and we can always pray with you after the service as well. Whatever works for you. Don't leave this place without receiving prayer or having someone listen to you if you'd like. So let's worship together. Lord, thank you. Thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for your love through the cross, Lord God. Thank you we can be freed from sin. And our troubled world needs to know that hope, that you forgive us from all that stuff that we wrestle with. May we know that today, and may our friends and family know that today, Lord. We come to you. We bring ourselves before you once again in worship. Amen.
Chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love. Amazing grace, the Lord has promised love to me. His work I hope secure. He will my shield and portion. As long as life endures, my chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior, has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace.
during this next song, if you've got children out in the kids clubs, if you'd like to go and collect those during this song, that would be brilliant. Thank you.